Here's a number that fools almost everyone. The average life expectancy of an early human was around 30 years. You've heard this or some version of it 100 times. Nobody lived past their 30s. Old age is a modern luxury. Our ancestors were ancient by 40 and dead soon after. It is one of the most repeated facts about prehistory. And it is, in the way most people understand it, completely wrong. Not because the number is fake, the number is real. But it's an illusion, a statistical ghost created by one single, heartbreaking fact about the ancient world. And once you understand that fact, the whole picture flips. Because the truth is that early humans who survived childhood often lived into their 60s, their 70s, and beyond. The old were there all along, sitting by the fire, watching the young, carrying something inside them that the entire group depended on to survive. This is the story of what growing old was really like in the ancient world. And it is, by turns, far darker and far more beautiful than the myth we've been told. So let's start by killing that myth properly, because it matters. When you hear that the average life expectancy was 30, your brain pictures a world full of 30-year-olds dropping dead of old age. But that is not what the number means. Life expectancy at birth is an average, and averages can lie spectacularly when the data is lopsided. And in the ancient world, the data was as lopsided as it gets because of one brutal reality: infant and child mortality. In the world before modern medicine, an enormous number of children died very young. From infections we now cure with a cheap pill. From diseases we now prevent with a routine shot. From the simple, savage fragility of being a small human in a world with no antibiotics. In many ancient populations, a quarter or more of all babies died before their first birthday, and many more before they reached adulthood. Now run the math. If half your population dies around age 1, and the other half lives to 70, what's the average? 35. But notice, almost nobody actually died at 35. The 35 is a number that describes nobody. It's the midpoint between a tragedy and a long life. The average is low, not because adults dropped dead young, but because so many lives ended before they truly began, dragging the whole average down toward zero. So here's the truth, the myth hides. If you were an early human and you survived the gauntlet of childhood, your life expectancy shot up dramatically. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, our best living window into how ancient people aged, show this clearly. Among people who reach puberty in these groups, the most common age of death isn't 30. It's closer to 70. 70. The same neighborhood as a modern human in an industrialized country. Read that again, because it overturns everything. A hunter-gatherer who made it to 15 had a very real chance of meeting their grandchildren. Old age was not invented by modern medicine. Old age has been part of the human story for as long as there have been humans. What modern medicine changed was not the ceiling of human life. It changed how many of us get to climb toward it. And it turns out the myth is doubly deceptive, because there's a second illusion stacked right on top of the first, and this one comes from the very science meant to reveal the truth. When archaeologists dig up ancient human remains, they try to estimate how old each person was when they died by reading the bones. For children, this works beautifully. Bones and teeth develop on a remarkably predictable schedule, so a child's skeleton acts almost like a clock. But for adults, the whole thing breaks down. Once you're grown, your skeleton no longer develops. It only degenerates, and degeneration is messy and wildly variable from person to person. One 60-year-old has the joints of a 40-year-old. Another has the joints of an 80-year-old. So here's the problem. The standard methods archaeologists long relied on tend to hit a ceiling. They can confidently say a skeleton belonged to an adult, even an older adult, but past about 50, the bones all start to look similar enough that the methods simply lump them together and stop counting upward. The result is that the genuinely old, the people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, get systematically undercounted in the archaeological record. Researchers studying this have warned bluntly that adults over 50 are almost certainly underrepresented in published studies of ancient skeletons. Think about what that means. We built a myth of a world without old people, partly because our own measuring tools were too blunt to see them. The elders were there in the ground all along. We just couldn't read their true age off their bones. The old have been hiding from us twice, once in the statistics and once in the very science we used to study them. So the old were always there. Which raises the real question, the one this whole video is about. What was their life actually like? And here is where we have to be honest, the way this channel always tries to be. Because the answer has a genuinely dark side, and we're not going to flinch from it. Imagine reaching old age in this world. There is no medicine for your failing joints. No glasses for your dimming eyes. No retirement, no pension, no soft place to land. And most importantly, in a world that survives on the edge, where every mouth must be fed by the labor of the group, your body is no longer able to do what it once did. You can't run down game across the savannah. You can't dig and gather from dawn to dusk. By the cold, hard arithmetic of survival, you have become something that terrifies every aging human in every era. A burden. And in the harshest circumstances, the ancient world had a harsh answer. There is a practice, documented across a number of human cultures throughout history, with a chilling name, senicide. The killing, or more often the abandonment, of the elderly. It's important to understand this clearly and without sensationalism. In most societies where it occurred, it was not casual cruelty, and it was not common. It was rare. It happened almost exclusively in moments of extreme crisis, famine, brutal winters, times when the group genuinely did not have enough food to keep everyone alive, and a terrible arithmetic took over. When there is not enough for all, who gets left behind? In some of these cultures, when starvation loomed, the very old or the very sick might be left behind as the group moved on. Sometimes the elder, understanding the situation completely, chose it themselves. They would stay behind as the band moved to new hunting grounds, accepting death so that the children, the future, might live. It was sometimes framed not as murder, but as a final devastating act of love, a sacrifice. The last gift an old person could give to the group that had been their entire world. I don't tell you this to be grim. I tell you because it's true, and because it reveals the razor's edge that human survival once balanced on. The dignity of the old was real, but it was conditional, and the condition was that there was enough to go around. When the food ran out, the most vulnerable paid first. That is the dark truth, and it would be dishonest to soften it. But, and this is the great turn in the story, that dark arithmetic was the exception, not the rule. Because most of the time, the old were not abandoned. Most of the time, they were treasured. And the reason why is one of the most profound things about our species. To understand it, you have to ask a strange question. Why do humans grow old at all? That sounds absurd, but it's a real evolutionary puzzle. In cold evolutionary terms, the purpose of a life is to reproduce and pass on genes. So once an animal is past its reproductive years, evolution should, in theory, stop caring about it. Most animals die at or near the end of their fertile lives. But humans are bizarre. Human women, in particular, live for decades after they can no longer have children. Menopause itself is almost unheard of in the animal kingdom. Why would evolution build a creature that keeps living and eating and needing care long after it has stopped reproducing? Here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. If old age served no purpose, evolution would have pruned it away long ago. The fact that we live so long past our fertile years means old age must have been doing something. Something valuable enough to be worth all those extra mouths to feed. So what was it? And the leading answer is one of the most beautiful ideas in all of human science. Scientists call it the grandmother hypothesis. And the core of it is this. Old humans, especially grandmothers, made the young more likely to survive. A grandmother who was no longer having her own babies could pour all of her energy, all of her experience into her grandchildren. She could gather food for weaned children who couldn't yet feed themselves. She could care for infants while their mothers worked. She could allow her daughters to have more children, more closely spaced, by sharing the staggering load of raising them. In other words, the presence of healthy old people directly increased how many children survived to adulthood. Evolution kept old age around because old age kept the children alive. We are, quite literally, the descendants of the humans who had grandparents. Long life wasn't a side effect. It was a survival strategy. The old were not a drain on the group's future. In a very real sense, they were the group's future. But feeding the grandchildren was only part of it, because the old carried something even more valuable than labor. Something that in the ancient world could mean the difference. Between life and death for the entire band, they carried memory. Think about what it meant to be old in a world with no books, no writing, no records of any kind. A world where the only place knowledge could be stored was inside a living human skull. An old person in that world was not a frail dependent. They were a library. A living, breathing archive of 70 years of hard-won experience. And consider what kind of knowledge that was. Where is the water in a drought? The secret spring that only fills once a decade? The old woman remembers. She was a child the last time it ran dry. Which plants are safe to eat, and which look identical but will kill you? The old man knows, because he watched someone die from the wrong one 50 years ago. When the great storms come, when the herds migrate, when the river floods, what are the signs that come before? The elders have seen it all, cycle after cycle, and they hold the pattern. There is a powerful idea in anthropology about this, sometimes connected to what researchers call the importance of elders. The argument is that in a complex, knowledge-intensive way of life, like human foraging, where survival depends on knowing an enormous amount about your environment, the accumulated wisdom of the old is a resource so valuable that it actually helped drive the evolution of long human life in the first place. We didn't just tolerate the old. We needed them so badly that natural selection favored living long enough to become one. And this knowledge was at its most precious in exactly the moments that mattered most. The rare disaster, the once-in-a-lifetime drought, the catastrophe that strikes only every few decades. When such a crisis hit, the young had never seen it before. They had no idea what to do. But somewhere in the group, an old person remembered. Remembered the last time the world turned cruel, and remembered what their own grandparents had done to survive it. In that moment, the elder was worth more than the strongest hunter in the band. The hunter could feed the group for a day. The elder could save the group for a generation. Think about that for a second. The frail old woman who couldn't walk far, who needed help to eat, who contributed nothing to the daily hunt, might be the single reason her entire people survived the year the rains failed. Her body was useless. Her mind was priceless. And the group that understood this, the group that protected and fed and honored its elders, was the group that lived. The group that abandoned them lost their library, and when the next disaster came, they faced it blind. And it went deeper than facts about water and weather. The old didn't just remember where the spring was. They carried the entire culture. Imagine you are that elder for a moment. You can no longer hunt, but in the long evenings, the young gather around you and you teach. You show a boy how to knap a blade from stone, a skill that took you a lifetime to perfect. Your hands guiding his through movements that would take him years to discover alone. You show a girl which fibers make the strongest cordage, how to read the tracks of an animal you can no longer chase, how to set a snare, how to find honey. Every technique your people possess, every hard-won trick of survival, lives in the hands and the memories of the old and flows from them to the young in a current that has never once stopped in the entire history of our species. And it wasn't only technique, it was meaning. The old were the keepers of the stories, the songs, the names of the ancestors, the rules of who could marry whom, the rituals that held the group together, the explanations for why the world was the way it was. When an old person spoke around the fire, they were transmitting the entire accumulated identity of their people, downloading thousands of years of culture into the minds of the next generation. A band without elders wasn't just a band that had lost a worker. It was a band that had lost its history, its teacher, and its soul, all at once. This is why, when we dig into the actual evidence from the deep past, we find not just abandonment, but its opposite, profound care. We have found ancient skeletons of individuals who lived for years, even decades, with severe injuries and disabilities, conditions that would have made it impossible for them to fend for themselves. People who survived only because someone fed them, sheltered them, carried them, and kept them alive long past the point where pure survival logic would have written them off. People who broke bones that healed, which means they were protected through months of helplessness. People who lost the use of an arm or an eye and lived on for decades anyway. A broken leg, in a world with no crutches and no hospitals, meant weeks or months of total helplessness. Someone had to bring that person food every single day. Someone had to keep them warm, clean, and safe from predators while they could not move. That is not an accident of survival. That is a choice, made over and over, day after day, by people who had every brutal reason to choose otherwise. Those healed bones are a message across tens of thousands of years. They say, we did not leave them behind. They say, this person mattered to us, not for what they could do, but for who they were. The bones of the ancient old don't only tell a story of harsh arithmetic. They tell, far more often, a story of devotion, of communities that chose, again and again, to carry their elders, because their elders carried them. So let's hold both of these truths together, the way the real world always forces us to, the dark truth and the beautiful one. Growing old in the ancient world meant facing a hard arithmetic of survival, and in the cruelest moments, the old sometimes paid the highest price. That was real, but far more often, growing old meant becoming the most important person in your world, the keeper of memory, the guardian of the children, the reason the group survived the storm. The old were not, as the myth suggests, a rare and pitiable few clinging to the edge of a young person's world. They were central. They were necessary. They were, in the deepest sense, the load-bearing walls of human society. And here's the part that I think should stay with us, because it points a quiet question right back at our own time. We live in a world that has, in a strange way, inverted all of this. We have books and computers and the entire accumulated knowledge of our species available instantly in our pockets. And so, for the first time in human history, we no longer need the old to remember things for us. Their function as living libraries has been replaced by silicon and ink. And somewhere in that transition, we began to treat the old not as treasures, but as problems. As people to be managed, stored away, gotten out of the way. We invented a thing our ancestors would have found almost incomprehensible. A society that sees its elders as obsolete. To a hunter-gatherer band, the idea of moving your grandmother into a building full of strangers to be cared for by people who never knew her when she was young would have seemed not just sad but insane, a deliberate throwing away of the single most valuable thing the group owned. They would not have understood how a people could be so rich in food, and so poor in sense that they would discard their own memory. But our ancestors knew something we are at risk of forgetting, that an old person is not just a fading body. They are a life's worth of experience, of love, of mistakes survived, and lessons learned. They are the only ones who remember how things were, which is the only way any of us can understand how things came to be. The grandmother by the fire wasn't waiting to die. She was holding the whole world together with what she knew. So here's my last question for you. In a world where we no longer need the old to survive, where their knowledge can be looked up and their memories seem replaceable, have we actually outgrown our need for them? Or have we simply lost the wisdom to see what they're still carrying, the things that were never written in any book and that will vanish completely and forever the moment we stop listening? Let me know what you think in the comments. I genuinely want to hear it. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and especially take care of your old. I'll see you soon.